Hello, welcome back to Expansive Astrology. My name is Melissa O'Malley, the Self-Care Witch, and this is Pisces season week 3. I say this every time. I can't believe it's Pisces season week 3. I can't believe we're here. We're almost done with Pisces season, which means we're almost done with the astrological year. We have an astrological new year with the beginning of Aries, which is such a beautiful opportunity. I love a new year, I love a fresh start. That's why new moons are my favorite. And that's also crazy, super exciting for me because I started expansive astrology last year. It's almost been a full year. We'll save the celebrating for next week. This week, we're talking about the shadow self. Pisces is about self undoing, right? Whereas Aries, the next season, is all about the self, very egoic. Pisces is about self undoing. So it felt really appropriate to talk about our shadow selves during Pisces season, those things that lurk in the depths of our being, the depths of our ego, the depths of our mind. Pisces sees it all, feels it all, knows it all, right? Pisces has witnessed the whole rest of the zodiac. And Pisces can be really deep and full of depth, and when we let these pieces of ourselves go unaddressed or run rampant without our intention, without our knowledge, that's when big troubles arise. So anyone who has worked with me knows that I'm all about empowerment. Everything for me comes back to empowerment. What is the most empowered way to approach whatever you're approaching? So this week, we're really casting a light on the shadows that dwell within us. And that can be so ugly to look at, right? But these shadows can run the show when they're unaddressed. So we're addressing these shadows so that we can more carefully and consciously act from an empowered place. It's all about empowerment. So what is the shadow, right? There are different theories, different ideas about the shadow. What I really focused my time and research and reflecting on was very Jungian, by Carl Jung. The shadow is made up of every part that we disown within ourselves. So take a moment to consider what you might disown that lives within you, that is a part of you. Jealousy, neediness, anger, fear, addiction, um, being too egoic, having a disproportionate love for money and possessions and things, right? What are those things that you distance yourself from? These parts of ourselves that we disown turn against us and collectively represent the shadow. So the work is in shining a flashlight on the shadow and then like merging with the shadow, assimilating the shadow, allowing those things to be a part of us in an empowered way, with intention, right? Because those things are a part of us. When we picture a shadow, it's kind of like outside of us, right? But really, these things are within us. They already are a part of us. So the more we can like assimilate and make peace with those pieces of us, um, the more we can control it, the more we can show up in an empowered way, the less control the shadow has. So it's imperative to look at this. Our shadow makes us whole. And when unaddressed, these parts of us run the show. There's a wonderful Carl Jung quote, "How can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole." Unquote. I love that. And we spend so much time disowning these pieces of ourselves. And these pieces of us too are beautiful. Our jealousy, our anger, our addiction, our or neediness, codependency, whatever exists and is lurking in your shadow. We'll talk about this more later, but it belongs, and it's beautiful too. It makes you whole, makes you a whole dang person. Doing this shadow work can liberate all of the energy that you are unconsciously investing in protecting yourself from the shadows. You know, instead of giving that energy to avoid and suppress and run away from these parts of ourselves, we get to harness that energy and use it to expand and grow and approach life from a more aligned and healthy and intentional place, which brings you inner strength and a greater sense of balance, a greater sense of peace. It makes you better equipped to take on life's challenges consciously and carefully and from an empowered place. It's all about empowerment. It's always about empowerment. It's always about expanding ourselves. This is expansive astrology. Like we're expanding um, our, what I want to say is awakeness. I don't know. Sounds a little woo woo even for me, but like um really stepping into empowerment. High vibes, right? A just kidding. I don't mean like high vibes, but like high vibes. The Jungian shadow can include everything that is outside of the light of consciousness, and these things may be positive or negative. We most often tend to reject or remain ignorant to the least desirable aspects of our personality, right? Which makes the shadow largely negative most of the time. But there are positive aspects that might also remain hidden in the shadow. Shadows of codependency or neediness can actually be indicators of how deeply and fully we can invest ourselves in love, right? Anger, which many of us reject or turn away from. Oh, I just saw this online. Anger is sadness's bodyguard. That's beautiful. That's positive. We can use our anger in a positive way. Not the shadow is most often largely made up of negative things that we want to reject, and it's not all negative, right? Way back in the very beginning of expansive astrology, in either like in one of my introduction videos, I talk a lot about how nothing is good or bad. That's just like a philosophy I live by. Nothing is good or bad, positive or negative. It all just is. And it exists within us and it makes you who you are. So, like, um, I say this to hopefully minimize some of the fear around looking at these pieces of ourselves. Keep in mind, too, that besides these personal aspects of ourselves, the shadow also contains the shadow of society, which is a collection of neglected and repressed collective or cultural values. So in terms of like capitalism or patriarchy, um, consider what might linger within you that you disown or deny, that might be like a cultural thing. It might come from your um, your culture at large. It could come from your family culture. It could come from your religious culture. Like what sorts of things societally, um, what sorts of things do the communities that you exist in encourage you to deny and not look at? And this might look different for everybody. Um, and it's really important to acknowledge everyone carries a shadow. And Jung wrote that the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. And the shadow can link us to our more primitive animal instincts, which are suppressed during early childhood. It's carefully and purposefully repressed by society, by our parents who were hopefully doing the best that they could. Glennon Doyle has a wonderful quote. When I was a child, I felt what I needed to feel, and I followed my gut, and I planned only from my imagination. I was wild until I was tamed by shame, until I started hiding and numbing my feelings for fear of being too much. Fear of being too much. It's relevant. Um, so, part of this work is tapping in with our animal instincts, our primitive selves, our very childlike selves. Who were you before you were repressed? Who were you before you were told what to be ashamed of? What existed inside of you before you were told what to be ashamed of? Every child knows kindness and love and generosity, and they also know anger and greed and selfishness, right? All of these traits are natural and shared human experiences. Everybody experiences these things. But as we grow up, traits associated with being good are accepted by our parents, by our classmates, by our teachers, by society at large, while other pieces are rejected, right? One of our basic needs is to be accepted, is to feel a sense of belonging. And we learn pretty quickly which of our feelings and reactions are socially acceptable. At a very young age, we become aware of what is acceptable and what is not, what brings us a sense of belonging and what does not. And when things like expressions of anger or selfishness or greed are rejected, it threatens that basic human instinct to seek belonging. So we reject those pieces of us so that we can maintain our sense of belonging. As poet Robert Bly says in A Little Book of the Human Shadow, quote, the child puts all of these unwanted parts into an invisible bag and drags it behind him, unquote, which is a lovely little illustration of what the shadow is. So here's your invitation to identify, shine a light on, and appreciate those disowned parts of you. This awareness of those parts of you allows us to make friends with those parts of you, to stop denying all of the complex parts of ourselves and to assimilate all the pieces of ourselves. Again, like we're seeking congruence, which was a topic of last season in Aquarius. Seeking congruence between what exists in us and what we portray outside of us, making sure that we are whole, allowing ourselves to be whole. And that includes a shadow, that includes some not so cute behavior sometimes. The key is awareness, the key is owning this shit. And here's the thing, once we start this work of acknowledging, appreciating, and integrating our shadow, we become aware of and ashamed of those qualities and impulses that we've worked so hard to deny in ourselves. But we can plainly see these things in others. Oof. It's projection. It's projection. Uh, the egotism and laziness and anger, sloppiness, unrealistic fantasies, carelessness, love of money or possessions, jealousy, neediness, addiction, all those things that I've named, those things that we judge in others can be a clear indicator of the things that we are rejecting in ourselves. It can be a clear indicator of the things that live in our shadow. And we start to identify those things as maybe simple weaknesses in us, but like moral deficits in other people, right? We can judge really harshly. So whatever qualities we deny in ourselves, they're glaringly obvious to us in others. So if neediness weren't in your shadow, someone else's neediness wouldn't bother you nearly as much, right? It might still come up, but it wouldn't bother you nearly as much. It's projection, fam. And like this is bitter medicine. It's bitter to realize that those things that drive me nuts about other people are true for me. It's not tasty. uh these projections insulate and harm us by acting as a constantly thickening veil of illusion between the ego and the real world. We're hella good at disillusioning ourselves. Again, these things we might just view as like a weakness or, a cute little quirky flaw in us, but they're like a moral deficiency in other people, right? We're really good at disillusioning ourselves. And Carl Jung said, a man who is possessed by a shadow is always standing in his light and falling into his own traps, living below his own level. And I think that is so um, beautifully stated and so important to really embrace and like live with the fact that when we allow our shadow to run the show, we are living below our own level. We are so afraid that those things are us, that those things make us unlovable, unworthy. They're, because we can't accept them within us. So surely we imagine that nobody else can accept that about us. And what is so beautiful and so important to know is that when the shadow runs the show, we are living below our own level. Like we are not allowing our potential to shine through because we are not acknowledging those negative things. It's like counterintuitive. We think that by shining a light on these things and really embracing them and owning them and um, um, embracing and owning them. We think that by embracing these things about us, we're bringing ourselves down a peg, right? Like it feels more natural. It feels like self preservation to deny these pieces of ourselves, to shove them to the back of our mind, the back of our psyche, and pretend that they don't exist. That feels like the thing to do, to get rid of them, to take away their power. Um, and by doing that, you're giving them more power. We're not allowing ourselves to meet ourselves at um, that high vibe that we're capable of. So let me chat a little bit about a shift from fear to medicine. The shift from fear to medicine. This is something that my tarot teacher Lindsay Mack speaks on. Um, those things that trigger our shadow and our shadow itself can be medicine. The things that trigger us can be medicinal. Medicine is often bitter, right? We don't want to take it, or we conveniently forget about it, or we stop taking it before it's finished because we feel better already. Medicine is usually pretty bitter, but when we view those bitter things as medicinal, we get to empower ourselves to find the healing in every bitter thing. Find the healing in every bitter thing. I love that idea. Uh, so, those things that might trigger your jealousy, or the things that trigger your ego, that trigger your um, neediness, the things that trigger your anger, uh, can it be medicine? Can you use the bitterness of the experience, that bitter taste, to grow, to expand, to be more empowered, to learn more about yourself, to show up more authentically and honestly in your relationships? All of those ugly, bitter triggers can be medicine to help you reach that level that Carl Jung was talking about, that high vibe that I'm sometimes talking about. It's all medicine, and looking at it that way empowers me personally. I hope that you feel the same. So the good news here is that the conscious self employs the shadow, not the other way around. If it were the other way around, we would all be a slave to our shadow, and that's no good. Ugh. We're not. We're not a slave to our shadow, or at least we don't have to be. We can have a relationship, we can relate with our shadow in a positive and informed and helpful way. And this requires brutal honesty with ourselves. It's courageous work. It's courageous to be that honest with ourselves. It's courageous to um find willingness to be imperfect and willingness to own those things about us and within us that we've spent our lives working so hard to suppress and deny, that we've spent our whole lives watching other people try to suppress and deny. Right? So doing this shadow work makes us more honest, more awake, better able to show up and really show up in our relationships, better able to own our shit, more capable of acting from an empowered from empowerment rather than whatever might be quietly lurking within us. I get to act from an empowered place rather than a jealous place. I get to act from an empowered and conscious place rather than an angry place. And again, anger, jealousy, neediness, all those things that might exist in your shadow are not bad things. They're just things. They're just pieces of us. They are human pieces of us. Can you imagine what it would be like if instead of trying to suppress and shut out and uh just get rid of our selfishness, what if we really just taught ourselves and taught our children what that might be trying to teach us, what our selfishness might be trying to gain us, how to use our selfishness in a way that is empowering for us and not harmful for others? It reminds me of the idea of when we don't allow ourselves to receive, when we struggle to receive goodness and receive gifts and receive compliments and receive pleasure and rest, when we don't allow ourselves to receive, we find ourselves in a position where we have to take. We have to take those things to make up for it. Um, it's similar to that. We get to choose when we shine a light on the shadow. We get to choose how to use those pieces of us in a more empowered way, or at least how to own those pieces of us so that they don't run the show, so they don't fuck up our relationships and all the good things that we're working toward, right? Pisces lives in the 12th house of self undoing, which is all about how ultimately how we serve ourselves. The 12th house is about our inner worlds, how we tend to ourselves. It contains those things, the shadow, our feelings, our thoughts, our beliefs, those things that we are more comfortable handling alone. Those pieces of us that we don't want other people to be aware of. And so this includes our shadow. It includes the ways that we act against our own best interests. It also, the 12th house encompasses the ways that we neglect ourselves or sacrifice ourselves for others, um, self destruction. Roy Gillette says the most difficult thing for us to accept is also the single most generous thing that we can do to help ourselves, allowing others into our inner worlds. So, this is really a pretty basic introduction to what the shadow is and what all it encompasses and how to get there, how to assimilate with it, how to allow it to be a part of you. I feel called to read that young quote again. Which one? I have like 3 young quotes in this week's script. How can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole. He knew what he was talking about, y'all. So that's my invitation for you for this week, is to begin to explore and most importantly, accept and maybe even, dare I say, love the parts of you that make up your own shadow. I'd love for you to leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this. Let me know what your experience is with your own shadow and self undoing. Or if you'd like to join me in my Facebook group, it's called Expansive Astrology. I'd love to bring this conversation there as well. Um, until next time, thank you so much for being here. It blows me away. I am so honored to share this space and this time and my words with you. I really hope that they serve. Um, if you feel called, subscribing to my channel, hitting the thumbs up button, notification or turning on notifications is supposed to help. But mostly sharing this work, sharing my work with others, if you feel called to, would really help me grow the channel and grow this work. I appreciate it so much. I will see you next week for the final video of the first year of expansive astrology. Holy moly. I don't think it's hit me yet. It's crazy. I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.